Welcome to The One Inside, an internal family systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sallenberger. On today's podcast, I talk with Nadine Lucas about reframing the 12 steps into IFS language. I am so excited to tell you about the Heirloom Summit, which is co-created by Duran Young, founder of Black Therapist Rock, and Dick Swartz, founder of IFS. It is intentionally taking place during Black History Month on February 26th through the 28th. We are going to be offering this collective healing experience as a powerful opportunity to explore the legacy burden of racism and anti-Blackness. Using IFS, we will explore the witnessing and unburdening process to work towards increased self-leadership and to begin repairing the personal impact of our traumatic history as a nation. Stay tuned for a link for the listeners of the One Inside podcast so you can receive a discount when you register. Hey everyone, happy 2021. If you follow me on social media, you know that I love choosing one word for the year. So instead of a New Year's resolution, I do one word. I've done it for the past couple of years, and I think it's fun and it's sustainable, and it's just a really great way of grounding throughout the year and just remembering your goals. And I just love doing it. So I really encourage everyone to pick a word and holler at me at IFS Tammy on Instagram, Twitter, and over at the One Inside Facebook page. So there's a little plug for that. Also, I'm super excited about today's guest. So today I chat with Nadine Lucas. She's level 2 trained, and she has converted the 12 steps into IFS language. And she has run, which we'll talk about, she runs these 2 different groups that have become incredibly popular around doing this. And we'll talk more in the podcast about this, but I'm really excited. I feel like this is just a taste of really cool things to come with Nadine and the 12 steps in the IFS Institute. So I'm super excited. One thing is what you're going to want to do, what you're going to want to do. Nadine and I went back and forth about what we're going to do about this. So since this is really just new and beginning, and we don't want to overwhelm her. I'm going to put up her 12 steps. The 12 steps, I made a graphic with them. There's a little bit hard to read, but I made a graphic with all the 12 steps, and I'm going to put that on the One Inside Facebook page so that way you have them. And then I'll let you know on that Facebook page when she gets her Facebook page for the 12 steps. When she gets that going, then, you can be looking out for that, but I will let you know on the One Inside Facebook page when that starts. So I hope that's clear. So what we do in this podcast today is basically the first half hour, sort of the first 30 minutes or so, we talk about her story and her struggle with the God language in 12 steps, and just her story. We talk about Overeaters Anonymous and sobriety, and just super interesting. And I think a lot of people will relate to her story. And in the second half, we talk a lot about, basically the second half is reframing the first 3 steps of the AA 12-step program into IFS language. So she walks us through those first 3 steps. And I think the last half of this episode is full of IFS language. So we talk about parts and firefighters and exiles and healing and burdens. We talk about, are parts addicted? Which I thought was super interesting. Like, is my part addicted to the peanut butter pretzels I just ate? So head on over to the Facebook page for those 12 steps written out, and then definitely let me know what your word is for the year. And then I will have that link for the Heirloom Summit. I'll have that link as soon as they get it to me. I'll get it to you so you can sign up and enroll for that and get a special discount. Okay, take care. Enjoy. I always start with just asking people where they are in the world and what would you see if you looked out your nearest window.
So I'm in Massachusetts, and when I look out my window, I see the back of Ashland State Park. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so do you see woods or a hill, or what do you see?
I see woods and it's a little bit marshy back there, and it leads to the reservoir if you go straight back from the back of my house.
Wow,
So it's a
lovely.
nice place to walk. We go walking quite frequently.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And we were just talking about it snowing. So is it starting to snow there?
It was snowing a little bit earlier. I saw some flakes, and right now it's not. I think it's in between rain and snow and trying to figure out what it wants to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like it's been like that here today too. And I just looked outside and it was snowing. So, but it's like a rain snow kind of thing. It's
Yeah.
not gonna snow a lot. So I am super excited to talk to you today. Your name has come up, and the rewriting of the 12 steps has come up. You and rewriting the 12 step, I feel like has come up a bunch of different places. And so I really wanted to grab you and talk to you about your experience with the 12 steps as much as you wanted to share,
Mhm.
and why you came to rewrite them in IFS language, and then I have a whole bunch of questions, and we'll
Sure.
just see what happens.
All right. Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for asking me.
Do you want to tell everybody who you are and just like a little bit about yourself at first, too?
Yeah. So my name is Nadine Lucas. By day, I'm a school social worker. I work in an elementary school and with kids in grades K through 5. I also have a part-time private practice, and I'm doing 12-step meetings.
And you're doing them online, and how many are you doing a week?
So I have 2 official meetings that I'm doing a week. This week is yesterday was the 11th week of the pilot study that I started on Sunday nights. And so next week is our last week together, not together, but it's our last week. We've gone through all of the steps, and we talked about what comes next and how we might probably cycle around again. And that's for therapists, people who are very, very familiar with the IFS model, or even people who, are still new to it, but in the field.
Okay. And they need to be IFS informed. Well, that's sort of ending right now, but sort of the people that were in this group, were they at least like IFS informed therapists?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the group's not ending, it's continuing. It's just
Okay.
the next chapter.
Gotcha. Okay. And is that open for other people, or is that something that we can maybe look forward to in the future?
It is open right now. People are contacting me directly through my email and asking me about it. And so I am giving out information as needed. The Thursday night group I added after a little while, after, I don't know, 8 weeks or so. The idea was to just start getting it out there and not have a huge agenda. And after I did the Sunday nights, and those were going really, really well. We have an average of 20 to 25 people at the meetings. I decided to open it up and advertise it on Facebook. I have, including the first time that I advertised it on the IFS New England listserv, I have almost 450 people on my list. So it's very
Okay.
exciting.
It's exciting. And what I'm hearing is there's a need.
There
There's,
is a need. The first meeting that I had on Thursday, 60 people showed up, but
wow.
I got over 300 emails asking for information and asking for the 12 steps rewritten.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about your own process of needing and wanting to, and having this desire to rewrite the 12 steps in IFS friendly language. Could I say it
Yeah,
that way?
yeah, that's good. That's a big one, right?
I know. I'm like, that's a big story. Yeah.
Where do I begin? So I guess I'll begin around 30 years ago, actually. I became aware of Overeaters Anonymous, and back in the 80s, it was really a big deal back then. The buzzword was dysfunctional family. So I read everything there was to read about dysfunctional families and discovered that knowing that my grandfather was an alcoholic, and discovered that there was, at that time, called ACOA. I know it's called ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. And through researching and looking at that, I came across Overeaters Anonymous and knew that I had issues with sugar. So I actually joined in my early 20s, but I didn't really use it. I didn't follow the steps, and I used it more as a diet club. And I actually had my sponsor fire me because she said I wasn't. Yeah, she said, you're not working the steps. And I didn't understand what that meant. What do you mean? What are steps? What do you mean? I just want to stop eating.
Wow. Okay. That's a part.
That's a part. That's a
Right.
part. So then I ended up getting married, and you know how things go. And it kind of all fell away, had a baby, had a daughter. And then about 10 years ago, I had gained some weight. I was feeling very unhappy with the way that I looked, the way that I felt. And thinking again, I had probably thought about OA on and off over the years, but there was one night, I can't remember the exact night, but I made a decision that I needed to go back to meetings because I just, couldn't deal with the negativity anymore. So
The
I went to,
negativity that you were experiencing inside,
yeah, the
like,
negative voices,
yeah,
the
okay.
part at that time, I didn't know that there were my negative parts,
Right.
insecure, what do they say? There's three, fear, doubt, and insecurity
Okay.
were the three huge voices in my head.
Okay. And so they were getting louder and louder, and you're like, were you like, this is just what I know, and sort of this is a tool that I'm familiar with, and so that's what I'm going to do.
It was a tool I was familiar with, and it was just a tool.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you decided the negative voices, those parts, not that language at that time, are just really loud. I'm so uncomfortable inside of myself, outside of myself. Going to go back to
Right.
OA.
I
Yeah.
had tried dieting, diets didn't work. So I decided to go back to OA, and it was a completely different experience than my first time. I actually really, really loved it. I found my people. I found people who understood what I was going through. I found literature, a lot of things that explained what I was going through, and the camaraderie, in going to the meetings. So I got a sponsor as well, and she ended up being one of the best things in my life, and she's still a good friend of mine. It's very special. However, throughout the whole time, even though I loved the program and I did get abstinent, I was abstinent from sugar and flour for probably about 10 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yes, about 10 years. I lost my abstinence a couple of years ago, and we'll get into that later. So I got abstinent, and I really, my whole story around 12 step is finding the God of my understanding, because I believed in God in terms of the concept of God, but I didn't really know what I believed in. I didn't have a name for it. The name God was very triggering for me. I had a really hard time with the language in the books. I had a hard time with the patriarchal language. And I think also too in the 80s when I was researching different things, I was also researching pagan religions and the goddess religion. So I tried on goddess at the same time, and that didn't feel right to me either. So I tried a lot of different things to figure out, for me, what is the God of my understanding? And that was the only thing that I never really could bring together. It was always, always me reframing the language over and over and over. But I liked the concept, and I did have at one point, I did believe in what I called a higher power, and it was wonderful.
Okay, so I want to hear more about if you feel comfortable, because I hear this a lot from people that don't like 12 steps because of the God language. So do you want to talk a little bit about why that was hard? And I know you and I talked before about how that just kept tripping you up, like because it's the first step, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Well,
yeah,
no,
and
the first step is I have a problem.
oh, okay.
I'm powerless. I have a problem. Step two is there's a power greater than me that can restore me to sanity.
Okay.
And then step three is I'm going to let God do that.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, so can you tell me what was happening for you as much as you feel comfortable sharing that was so triggering for you and what did you do about it? Like that was the problem for you is I don't like this God language and how did you end up what did you do about that?
Right. So, as I shared with you before, I do have a trauma history related to my father. And because of that, I feel like that's the patriarchy, that's the powerlessness that I felt as a child, and the power that men have in the world is very triggering for me personally. And I understand that. I understand it's a burden. I know that it's a trailhead and I'm working on it. But that was really the main thing. Since then, actually, I've come to learn that there is something called a legacy burden. And there's, I believe, Ed Yeats talked about having a legacy burden around the shame, around a shame based, so I wrote it down, a shame based Judeo Christian God.
Mm.
And I think that it's larger than me as well, because it really felt like in the 80s, this whole patriarchy, I sort of opened my eyes and woke up to, oh my God, we're living in this patriarchal world.
Yeah.
That had such a huge influence on me. And I wasn't really sure why, but I think it's because it's a legacy burden as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing I was thinking as you're talking is I imagine then um, that the idea of admitting I'm powerless to that little exile was like, or her protectors, right? Her protectors were like, no, 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 we cannot admit we're powerless because
Exactly.
yeah, yeah,
That's a really hard word. That was one of my struggles with power, what the word is. And there's a lot of literature that get around it and talk about it. But I was powerless as a child. And there was a part of me that was fighting and saying, no, I'm not powerless anymore. How I'm not going to say that.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. But I knew that I did come to a place where I was willing to say that I was powerless over food because I could not stop eating sugar. Like
yeah,
I definitely knew that.
yeah,
And so they said, the group can be your higher power. Anything that you want can be your higher power. So at first it was the group. And then as I started trusting the group, I would practice. They would say, fake it till you make it. And so I would practice faking that I had a higher power that loved me and that was only going to do good things for me and was going to help me. And so I came to believe, and that happened for me at that time. And I believe that's why I did have that success.
yeah. You talked about how you went from higher power, which was like not a fan,
Hmm.
to calling it the source
Yes.
and then the universe and then self. So I don't think it probably was in that order, but sort of tell me about those concepts and how you kind of came to wrestle with those ideas.
Right. So, can I go back a little bit and tell
Of
you about a
course.
couple years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, a couple years ago, there was a part of me that decided it was going to have chocolate. And that part decided I was fine. And then I had a little more and a little more. And I'm like, I'm fine. I can handle this. A little more and a little more. And then you know the story. So it got completely out of control. And I ended up, for a couple of years, really being in that binge cycle, feeling addicted to sugar, feeling unable to control it. I had discovered IFS and went into therapy and was working with these parts. And I remember thinking to myself at one point, oh, I should go back to 12 step. But I couldn't. I couldn't go back because we were talking about this aspect of ourselves called self. And I thought that it was so amazing. And I just couldn't swallow anymore that language, the patriarchal language. And I didn't know what to do. So my therapist was like, some people outgrow 12 step and they move on and they find other things. And that was really surprising to me at first. I didn't quite understand that. But then I was trying to work with my parts in therapy and not feeling any relief. And actually, the voices got louder and stronger. And there were parts of me that were suffering so much that finally I said, well, with this new knowledge of self, I'm going to go back to 12 step and I'm going to make it work. So I did. And I still had some issues with the language. So what I had was self, which is wonderful, but self isn't God. To me, self is, so if there, my concept of God is love. It's an energy in the universe. It's not a person. It's not a man sitting up in the sky. It's pure love, and love is what heals. I began to feel like self was, you could say, the essence of God that lived in me, or the essence of love. I had done a lot of reading, and I love listening to Wayne Dyer. And he talks about the source, who is our source, the source of everything. And when I heard that language, I loved it. And so for me, and before that, I used to just turn things over to the universe. Just the universe is not again, it's not a person, but it's the entire cosmos. So I would turn it over to that. But then when I came back to 12 step, I had self, but self wasn't God. So there was still a problem.
Right.
And at first, actually, I thought self was God. I was convinced. I'm like, oh, Richard Schwartz, he's not telling the truth. He's really talking about God. Like, he just won't admit it. And the first thing I wanted to do when I met him was to get him to say that self was God, which was kind of funny. But
Well, that I might. Okay, there's a part of me that's like saying that because I probably don't need to say this, but now I'm like, now I have to say it. I feel like maybe it was because you had been, not that you had been tricked, but there's been this whole time, like over all these years, there's been this, like, okay, we'll just believe in the higher power. And you're like, you're talking about God, no matter how you turn it, like you're talking about
yeah.
God. And so I think yeah, I think was that kind of what was happening. So you're like, I don't want to be tricked again. I don't know if would be sort of your part's language, but that's sort of what I'm hearing.
I wouldn't say that I was tricked, but because I knew, like, all of the things that I had studied and researched about religion and spirituality, is that the answers are within us. I mean, that's the message that many, many traditions say. I just couldn't find it. I'm like, what do you mean it's in me? I have no idea what you're talking about. What's in here is kind of empty, actually.
Oh. Okay, so you were like, okay, so I'm going back to 12 step. I'm bringing self with me, and the self is in me. But what does that do with my God problem, or the
Yeah,
source problem, or the universe? And
right.
so sort of what do we do with that? We've got self and we've got the universe. And so,
So my therapist actually said to me very calmly one day, and it just clicked, and it made so much sense. She said, Nadine, parts surrender to self, and self surrenders to God, or you could call it self surrenders to source. And I went, oh my God, that's it. Oh my God.
yeah, say it again. It's so beautiful. Say it
Yeah.
again.
Parts surrender to self, and self surrenders to source.
Yeah, that's great. And that was like, that's it. That was
That's
the
it.
answer.
That
Yeah.
was it. And
Yeah.
I do want to share really briefly that the other thing that helped me so tremendously was I was reading in A Woman's Way Through the 12 Steps by Stephanie Covington. And can I read you a small passage?
I would love that.
She said, this is page 34. As you think about the nature of your higher power, you might also want to ask if it's higher at all. Where does this power exist for you? Outside or inside? Neither or both? Perhaps you believe in a power inside you that is greater than your ego self, the self that represents your outer identity, but is really only one part of you. Your deep inner self is the self that is greater than who you seem to be on the surface. Now, doesn't that sound like she is talking about self and parts?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
That gave me permission. That solidified my understandings. I got, so self is in me, and self is also spiritual. Self is, as Richard Schwartz says, it's a particle in a wave.
Yeah.
So there's an aspect that's a part of me, and then there's an aspect that's larger than me.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I have three questions and I want you to answer them all, but we can just pick one of that at a time. So here
Okay.
are my three questions. One is lost my abstinence. I want to talk about that. The other one is you had shared this idea of overeating sugar because of the emptiness and needing to be filled. And I had written that down from our last conversation. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, because my guess would that would probably be a similar concept for anyone that's struggling with any sort of addiction, sort of this
Yeah, it
emptiness.
is. It is
Yeah,
a concept. Yeah, I don't mind
yeah.
talking about that.
Okay. And then my third question is why the return to the 12 step? Like there clearly was something. Like
Mhm.
why are the 12 steps so powerful? So those are my three questions and I can re-ask them.
Yeah, so re-ask me the first one.
Okay, so the first question is earlier when you said I lost my abstinence, I felt this sort of yucky feeling in my belly when you said that. So tell me about what that means. Yeah, tell me about what that means.
So the wonderful thing about the OA program is nobody tells you what abstinence is. It's something that you can decide for yourself.
Okay, I didn't realize that. Okay, okay.
Yeah. So there used to be years and years ago a gray sheet, no flour, no sugar, no spices. It was gray. It was really horrible.
No, why no spices? Sorry.
I don't know. Maybe I just made
Okay.
that up.
No. No, okay. So something so really like gray, bland, like this is how we should eat our food. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And they talk about praying and asking your higher power, going to a nutritionist, really asking the questions and finding the answer within yourself. What does abstinence look like for you? Of course, that set me off onto looking at every single diet, not a diet to lose weight, but every single kind of lifestyle diet that there is. I looked at raw foods. Oh, I have to eat raw food because that's the most, I don't know, it has the most life energy and I'm supposed to be eating that. And I looked at, no, I have to be eating all my food cooked, macrobiotic. And I'm like, no, I have to. There's all these different ways that I felt like I was searching for what is the perfect diet that would work for me. But for me, it was flour and sugar was the ultimate. And for me, it was mostly junk food, cake, candy, desserts, sweets,
Like
and
all the good food. Yeah.
all the all the
Sorry. Sorry. That
all
was
the
a
fun food.
part.
No, it's fun. No, it's all the fun food.
Yeah. No fun food. That's why the sheet's gray.
Yeah, but it worked for me,
I mean, you did it
and
for 10 years. That's a really long time.
yeah, I did. And there was a part of me that's so interesting because every time I had a teeny tiny little thought that said, "Oh, maybe I no." There was this
Mm,
really strong no part that would come in, and I didn't question the no. It was so strong. And then maybe a week later I might go, "Oh, but maybe I no." So this
wow.
no part really came in and helped me
Yeah.
not even think about it. If I even tried to think about it, it would come in and stop me.
Yeah.
And I really relied on that inner no. That was such in place for such a long time
Yeah.
until one day that maybe because I was in IFS therapy, right? There was a part of me that said, "Oh, I wonder if," and there was no. And so I continued the thought. I wonder what would happen if I had chocolate. Maybe I can have chocolate because it's really just a part of me and it's not a big deal. But it was a big deal because it did send me down, the addiction cycle of sugar and overeating, and the mental obsession is really one of the worst things about it for me.
Yeah.
Was the 24/7, the mental obsession around my weight, what I looked like, what I ate, what I put in my mouth, when was I going to put food in my mouth, what was I going to put in. It was just constant. And then when I did put food in my mouth, oh my God, the guilt and the shame. I can't believe I put that in my mouth. Why did you do that? You shouldn't have done that. Well, next time I won't. But then I do it again and again and again. And that's the cycle of addiction that people talk about.
Yeah, that's such a good description, and I can feel it. As you're talking about it, I'm like, yes, yes, I'm with you feeling that. It's so miserable. So, what do you think happened to your no part? Like, did she just get kicked out of the village? You were like, another part kicked her out?
That's so interesting. I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that, and I'm going to have to bring that to therapy. Thank you.
Oh, sure. You're
Um,
welcome.
my no came out in a different way. I don't know if it's the same no part or a different part. But then there was a part that started saying you need to restrict. So don't eat that, restrict calories,
Did that
restrict.
feel different than the abstinence? Like the choice to not have sugar in flour felt probably different than the part that's saying restrict.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have many parts. I have the part that is addicted to sugar. I have a part that overeats. I have a part that binges. And they all help me. Yeah, they all help me in different ways. But what was
Yeah.
your question? You were.
Well, so I don't know what my question was. I forgot, but let me just say I love that you just said that. Like they all help me. They all help me in different ways.
Mm-hmm. They
And
do.
tell me what that feels like as you're able to say that right now.
Well, I'm able to say it now because for me right now, I feel that I am abstinent, and I'll explain what that means in a minute for me. All of our parts are created to help us. That's the whole IFS model. Like all parts are welcome and all intentions are good. So everything that our parts do is to help the system and to help us survive. So my parts help me survive. And I feel like the part of me that loves sugar was really looking for sweetness in my life. And so as a child, I felt like there's a part of me that knew that I wasn't getting enough sweetness. And so that was the only way that I could get it. And so I really appreciate that part who provided me with sweetness in my life growing up.
She worked really hard to make sure you got it too, I think.
She did. And she loved
Yeah.
sugar.
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
okay.
sugar
Now
is
it's
good.
okay.
Yeah. It's good. Do you want to talk about what abstinence means for you now?
Sure. So for me, what I've been doing for about 3 weeks now, 3 to 4 weeks, is no flour, no sugar. And I'm not so strict about it. There are some places that say, well, no artificial sugars. I do drink diet soda. I do consume artificial sweeteners, but it's the obvious cake, candy, cookies, anything that has flour, butter, and sugar in it together, forget it. And so that includes pasta, even though pasta for me is a weakness. And so I haven't had any pasta and no white bread. I eat Ezekiel bread. I do use some artificial creamer in my coffee. So what I wanted to say is that while I was in therapy and I knew that all this suffering was coming from my parts, but I couldn't unblend. And in therapy, I couldn't unblend, or I'd unblend briefly, and then the minute I left therapy, I would get blended again. And the mental agony, the part of me that obsesses about food, was so strong. That's the piece that brought me back to 12 step because I had been successful. I had self. Well, maybe this would be different. And the thing that does bring me back to 12 step over and over and over is the community
Okay. Yeah.
and not doing this alone. They say
Yeah.
you can't do this alone. And I
Yeah.
totally agree. I mean,
That's great.
I was tired of suffering and therapy wasn't helping, like IFS wasn't helping in that particular moment. And I was suffering so much and I just wanted the suffering to end,
Yeah. Yeah.
the emotional suffering. So
Yeah.
I, but I was armed with self. So I went back in knowing that I had self. And then when my therapist was saying, parts surrender to self, I did have a softening in the beginning of parts softening back and not binging so much. I felt much calmer inside of my head, but I still hadn't healed those parts.
Yeah, got it. Right. No, I think that's my I've had those experiences too, where just the unblending and befriending can do so much, can feel so good. And that's
Mhm.
right, it's not a full unburdening, it's not getting to the exile, but just that self being on board and my parts meeting self is like, it's like so much relief.
Right, right. And that to me, that's the amazing part. So when I was talking earlier about, love, God is love, or, I didn't know what love was. And so
Yeah.
how do you love your how do you love yourself? How do you learn
Yeah.
to love yourself when you have never had that experience of self-love? You've only had an experience of self-criticism and
Yeah.
self-judgment. That was confusing to me, but that's where IFS came in, and that's what blew me away because I had experiences of self, and they were experiences of compassion and curiosity and calm and loving. And it was warm and wonderful. And when I was told, that's self, Nadine, I was like, this is it? This is self? Oh, I know what this is. I know
Oh,
what this is. I feel this. I can do this. And then that was, the turning point.
I love it.
Another turning point in terms of therapy of like, oh, I am self. I do feel it.
Mm.
And then having my parts get to know me.
Yeah, right. Because you had believed and your experience had been that I don't have the answers within myself. I can't, there's nothing good in here, or I'm terrible and all that stuff. And so, what hope that is for people that are listening that maybe have had that experience. Like, I haven't had a parent love me, or I haven't had people love me in a way that feels safe, or, just the critical. I have a client that her critical voices and her inner bullies are so awful, and it's just so hard to get to befriend them or anything. So there's so many people out there, I bet you, that are listening right now that are just like can really identify with that.
Yeah, it's a felt experience. You can't verbally explain it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have to experience it
Yeah. Yeah. And we experience it with that unblending, right?
with
Like,
unblending and also the help of the self from my therapist. So other
yes,
people's
right.
self brings our self out. And that's also another beautiful thing about the IFS 12 steps is that you have all this self energy in the room. And it's
Yeah.
really amazing.
What I really want to talk about is the reframing of the first three steps.
Yep.
Like, how did you reframe them? Tell me what the first three steps are reframed.
So the first step boils down to I can't. The second step is God can. And the third step is I will let God. And so one, we admitted we were powerless over food, that our lives had become unmanageable. And there was that powerless word. And what I learned in IFS is that we had parts that were burdened with behaviors, with these extreme behaviors, and that I'm not powerless over healing that because the healing is inside me.
Mm,
And self and parts work together to unburden and to let go of the burdens and do the healing together. It's a partnership, it's a relationship. Self has to be compassionate towards the parts, and parts have to trust self
mm.
and then be willing to let go of the burden. So I'm like, no, we're not powerless. So I reworded it as we acknowledged that we were not living a self led life, that some parts were burdened with extreme addictive behaviors and felt unmanageable.
I love it. I love it. Well, in that, there's no blame, right? The parts were burdened.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Yes.
like that language.
It's compassionate, definitely.
Yeah. And then what about the second one?
So, and then the second step is we came to believe that self could heal our burdened, addicted parts and restore us to inner peace. So I took out the word sanity. You know, a lot of people have issues with the word sanity, even though it's been reframed as sanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. It's a reframe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I took it out, and I I came to believe for me that self could heal my burdened, addicted parts and restore me to inner peace. And so that was very powerful for me.
So you're saying, I just want to share this as you're saying that, like there's a part of me. I mean, I'm like, I obviously believe that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be like doing this. But as you're saying that, there's another part of me that's like, right before I got on this call, I shoved a bunch of chocolate peanut butter pretzels in because they're amazing.
Hmm.
And there's a part of me that does believe I can't not do that.
Interesting.
So when you said that, I'm like, yes, I could fully believe that self can help our, addicted parts. And there's
Yeah.
another part of me that was like, do you really? Oh yeah, there's a
Yeah.
trailhead for me. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah. And actually, I had someone recently tell me that the part the part is not addicted. The part has a behavior,
Okay.
so there's
Yeah.
addictive behavior, but the part is not an addictive part, it's a part. And we don't get rid of the addictive part, we get rid of the addiction, which is the behavior,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
part stays.
Right. So if we think of like a firefighter who
Mhm.
is like, I'm triggered, and how I know how to handle when you're triggered is I eat all the chocolate peanut butter pretzels. And
Yes.
so I don't think of it, I when I think of a firefighter doing that, it's like I don't want to say like I love the firefighter and I don't like what they're doing, but it does have that feeling, right? Sort of the firefighter isn't addicted. I don't think of a firefighter as being addicted. It's doing that behavior that is going to, take out, put out the fire. So I wouldn't think of a firefighter as being addicted. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Right, right. But I
Does that make
wasn't,
sense
there
what I
were,
just said?
oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And there are parts of me that were feeling very frustrated with the part addicted to sugar. I said I understood why the part was doing what it was doing, but I also hadn't healed the exile that was protecting the burden. So, and that for me, that takes a long time because of my trauma. I have layers and layers and layers of protection.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Right. And probably lots of parts that use sugar, right? So not just the one little girl who used sugar as a way to bring sweetness in her life, which is so sweet. But there are probably other parts, right? Firefighter behaviors or firefighters or other parts that have used sugar. Because that
yeah,
idea that when parts find a strategy that works, then other parts will borrow that strategy too. So whether it's sugar, we're talking a lot about that today because that's certainly my addiction and yours, but definitely that could be for over shopping and over drinking and whatever the firefighter behavior or soothing behavior, right? They're soothing behaviors, whatever that is.
that's exactly what I think addictive behaviors are. We're trying to self soothe. So we're either trying to avoid suffering or we're trying to relieve suffering. And then step three is instead of made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. This is a huge trigger for me because, well, wait a minute, turn my will? Well, I understand, I understand that I think my parts want to be in control and they want to do the behaviors they want to do or the behaviors that they've learned to do, and they do their jobs very, very well. And I appreciate that. But turn my life over to the care of God as I understood Him. Again, that language was very patriarchal, and I had to reframe it. And I'm like, but am I really turning my life and my will over to the care of self as I understand self? And that really wasn't it either. So what I ended up doing was saying that we made a decision to be self led whenever possible and follow the IFS model of healing as we understood it. So, self is in the lead, and realizing, oh my God, I've been living a life where my parts have been leading and making decisions, not myself. And as you go through therapy and you go through the process, and there's more self energy available, you begin to understand what it means to live from self.
Mm, I love that. I love that. Does it put, so there's a part of me that was like, does it put the IFS model in the place of God? I know it doesn't, but it sort of sounds like that.
It does sound like that. And I actually had someone say to me, "Oh, you replaced God with IFS."
I know that's what I was like, huh?
um, because the model of healing is so huge, and it's simple, but it's complex at the same time. So the whole IFS model is the fact that I am self, I have parts, and I live in a body. So it involves this understanding as what is self. When you come to an understanding of self and you come to an understanding of parts and how to heal those parts, understand that you have exiles and burdens. Well, if I follow the IFS model of healing, oh my God, I'm going to be in self energy. I'm going to have more and more and more self energy available to me.
I like that. I was also thinking about, and I don't really totally understand all of this, but that idea though that we're not just talking about my self and my body in this. We're also talking about how me being self-led changes the energy of the room and my house and the trees and our culture. And sort of maybe that's part of sort of this bigger healing thing that the more self-led we are, the more it affects the air. And I don't know, like I think there's something about that. Like I've heard Dick kind of talking about that. And I know that sounds kind of weird. I don't know, but I think there maybe that's part of it too, right? It's sort of so powerful that it's not just about enclosed me and my person. It affects everything.
It does. It affects everybody. And the more self energy we have available, the more other people's self energy becomes available. And we're aware of ourselves, are aware of each other, and we're more likely to have a self to self relationship.
Yeah, I love it. Even
Yeah.
though that sounds so weird.
No, but Marielle Pasteur and Richard Sforce, they put together a mandala called The Unburdened Self. And this is about what's possible. What are we doing? What's the whole point of IFS is to become unburdened and to live a joyous, peaceful, loving, compassionate life. They talk about the unburdened self, and it's a really great model. And it talks about what happens when our firefighters are unburdened, what alternative roles could they play when our managers are unburdened, when our exiles are unburdened, and self energy is available. It's really powerful. These 12 steps initially, I believe I haven't broken it down into like Overeaters Anonymous or AA, alcoholic. Like, I don't separate alcohol from food, from gambling, from relationships, from shopping. I don't separate those because they're all burdened. They're all
Yeah,
burdens.
yeah,
And so I feel like my intention for the program was it can help everybody in IFS. It can help everybody.
yeah. I think it can.
Yeah. We don't need to like the meetings. So the Sunday night meetings that I have, we have all kinds of addictive behaviors, but we can all relate to each other because we're all talking about IFS. And we're all saying, oh, yeah, I have a part that does X, Y, and Z. And oh, I have a behavior. And oh, and I unblended and I felt myself. And the language is just amazing that you can be surrounded by people who speak the language. That was why I couldn't stay in OA when I went back, like over the summer. First of all, I felt like I had nobody to talk to about my experience. I couldn't talk about self. And I thought people would think that I was being selfish because in AA they talk about relieving the burden of self,
Oh, okay.
and they talk about letting go of self will. And there's an expression, "Thy will, not mine, be done." So there's this whole concept of self that is not the self of IFS. The
Yeah,
self of IFS is very spiritual.
yeah.
And like I said, I've already talked about what I believe, but many people feel that self is very spiritual. And I think that's what Dick is trying to say when he has talked about it and related it to most major religions.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And so you have the Sunday night group and then you have this Thursday night group. And can people email you? Is there a Facebook page? Like tell me sort of next steps for listeners.
So the next steps are we're in the process of making a Facebook page. So that will be out soon, hopefully in the next couple weeks by the new year. How can people learn about it? I'm creating a face we are creating a Facebook page. The 12 steps are going to be listed. I have plans. I've been in touch with Dick Schwartz, and we are in conversation about how to bring this to the IFS Institute and really create an organization, a worldwide IFS 12-step organization.
It's beautiful. I love it. So for now, people that are listening, they've got hopefully lots of takeaways to do their own work and their own trailheads, and they can look forward to the Facebook page that will be up soon,
Yes,
and to look forward to whatever you and the IFS Institute come up with. And I know you've talked about maybe writing a book. So this
yes.
is just sort of the beginning. This is sort of the beginning, it's sort of a little bit of a teaser for people. And if people are in 12 steps, sort of if they're already working their program and doing their steps, what could their takeaway be for sort of doing their own work?
That's one of the things that we actually do say is that this program does not replace necessarily any other 12-step group, that they're compatible, because healing is healing and so many people find healing in the 12 steps, and I don't ever want to take that away from anyone or say that anybody is wrong. I got healing from them, and I believe that a lot of the energy that people feel is self energy
Yeah.
in the 12 steps. But the thing that is wonderful about this program and what people say is that it's softer and there's no blame and shame. There's less blame and shame, and it's a lot about compassion. And people find these steps very soft, very open, very gentle. And so I think that anybody who is involved in the IFS community or in 12 steps, what I want to do is be able to bring IFS to 12 step community, and that's a huge endeavor. How do we do that? How do we do a beginners group? How do we start bringing IFS to the world? And I know
Yeah.
Dick has some ideas around that, and I think this is another pathway.
So if you could do anything else in the world, like anything else besides what you're doing, what would you like to do? Doesn't matter, money, time, forget COVID's not happening. You can do anything you want. What would you do?
I'd quit my job and I would develop this program. Honest to God, I
Yeah.
want to do this full time. I truly, truly believe in this program. Oh, I did want to say one thing. Talking about abstinence. So I went back to OA. I still had issues with the language, but I had self, but I didn't have people to share that with. And so I felt lonely. I also I did have some abstinence, but I think I was probably like white knuckling it, is what they say. I was probably just pushing those parts of me away and not really having a conversation with them. And then I actually attended a seminar, not a workshop. I attended a workshop on addictions and eating disorders, a level 2 IFS training. And I got to stare at my face 6 hours a day for 6 days in a row. And I was not happy with what I saw. And we're also talking about sugar, and is sugar an addiction, and what's the difference between having
Wow.
a substance addiction versus having a process addiction, and all this different stuff. And so we talked about how it's up to individual people, you know, how this works for them, what abstinence means to them. But there was one moment where, and I've heard this voice before, I just have chosen to ignore it. But there is a voice inside me that says, you know what, Nadine? You really can't have the sugar and the flour. It's really not good for the system. My parts gave up and turned it over to myself, and self turned it over to source. And I can say that I've been abstinent for 3 to 4 weeks, according to my definition of abstinence. And my parts are very, like there's not a like, oh, I want, no, like that doesn't happen. I look at something and I'm like, I'm not even interested.
Wow.
So
That's powerful.
yeah. And like I was nervous today. It didn't even occur to me to overeat or to eat sugar. Yeah. So
That's
a different
amazing.
relationship, a completely different relationship with those parts. They've softened. And I think because I don't know, I had this inner knowing,
Hmm.
and it was just so clear and so strong. And I was like, finally, my parts were like, okay, okay, we get it, we get it. No more sugar and flour. Okay, we're willing to give it up because they wanted inner peace.
I love it. I was just thinking that You said it's a different relationship, and I thought it's right. It's a different relationship with food. No, it's a different relationship with your parts.
Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And it's the parts trusting self.
Yeah, right, right. It's that self-to-part relationship that we talk so much about.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I love it.
Well,
Thank you so
thank you
much. This was
so
great.
much. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you like this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time. Today's episode was sponsored by Brighter Vision. What's the point of having a beautiful website if it doesn't attract the clients you want to see? As the worldwide leaders of website design for therapists, Brighter Vision sees this issue happen way too often. A nice-looking website doesn't equate to a successful website. The truth is, your current website might even be turning off potential clients. That's where Brighter Vision comes in. Brighter Vision's team of website designers will create a website that is centered around attracting and retaining your ideal client so that you can have a nice-looking website as well as a successful one. Better yet, Brighter Vision is offering $100 off exclusively for listeners of the One Inside podcast. To take advantage of this offer, simply go to brightervision.com/inside. Again, that's brightervision.com/inside.